Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. By the way, I got a voicemail this morning, I think from a guy named Dale. You know those little 1-minute things I do during the day, and I was talking, I guess I had one on the other week about coins, and I said the only coin that looks to the right is the penny. And I said, you can see what that's worth. And I was just making a little, kind of having some fun with it. Well, I had a call this morning. Gary, you should check your facts. Because up till like 4 years ago, I guess it was, I had read a book that apparently didn't take this into consideration. For 4 years ago, we now have a nickel that looks kind of straight ahead instead of to the right or to the left. So check your facts. Have a good day. So anyway, I stand corrected. I want to make sure I get all the right information out there. So Dale, thank you so much for keeping me straight. I do appreciate that. Always appreciate it. Let's get back to the phone lines. And our special guest this morning is Dr. Gerard Francis Lameiro. He's been with us before. He has a PhD. He is an author, philosopher, economist, and engineer. He's the author of Renewing America and Its Heritage of Freedom, America's Economic War, and Choosing the Good Life. And he joins us here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show. Dr. Lameiro, always a pleasure to have you on, sir. Good morning to you.
Oh, I always enjoy it. You ask great questions.
Well, thank you. It's nice to have you aboard, and I appreciate the compliment. You know, in this week where we've heard so much about San Bernardino and the terrorist actions there, obviously the other subject this week has been the kind of rhetoric coming specifically from Trump, who continues to expand his lead over the GOP field in the latest national poll. And your article that you wrote really kind of steps in line with that when you talk about, should we expect an uncivil civil war of words in the Republican Party next? I think we're starting to see the beginning of that. It hasn't really been all that awful, but we saw John Kasich putting out some pretty tough stuff in terms of some ads this past week. We're seeing some other people starting to call out Trump a little bit. People up till now have been afraid to do that with him. Trump is as outlandish as ever in what he has to say. So what do you make of all of what is beginning to happen with the Republican candidates here? And will this turn into an uncivil war of words?
Well, I think it really is, and I think it's already started in a lot of different ways. We are now about 9.5 weeks from the Iowa caucuses, and right after that it's New Hampshire, South Carolina, and you go into Super Tuesday in a hurry. And people realizing that Trump is not a flash in the pan, that he's struck a chord with the American people who are angry at the establishment Republican Party for not having repealed Obamacare. By the way, that's the reason you're seeing Obamacare starting to get repealed in Congress, because people in Congress are getting the message that the voters are angry with the party for not doing more to fight Obama and his crazy policies. And I won't say crazy. What I'll say is wrong policies. But to answer your question, there's three areas. The rhetoric between the candidates themselves, an increase in negative and the quantity and the negativity of ads. And the third thing is the mainstream media's attack on Trump and Cruz, which are going a little bit overboard, I think, already. I've seen articles that look to me like they're quoting inaccurate figures, and that's going to some length to trump up charges against those two.
You know what's really interesting to me? I'm looking at the national average in Real Clear Politics this morning, and Trump is now up to 30.8%. Carson's
right.
Second at 17.5%, and then Cruz and Rubio both benefiting, I think, by some pretty good debate performances. But more importantly, I think standing up tall here during this time of terrorism with Paris and now with San Bernardino at 13.5%. And then I look over here at a CNN poll. It says Trump hits new high at 36%. Cruz second with 16%. And Carson is now dropping to third. Carson has not come off as terribly strong about terrorism, starting with Paris and of course, now here's San Bernardino. So, you know, what are Americans looking at right here from your particular vantage point as far as Trump is concerned? Because obviously every time he says something, you hear the media licking its chop, the mainstream media, that is, and they're saying, all right, got him this time. Okay, he's going over the top this time. This guy is really out there. And yet every single time he defies the logic and what has been the normal political practices in this country.
Yeah, well, you picked up exactly right on a major trend. About 20 years ago, I wrote a piece called 10 Laws for Winning Presidential Elections. And one of the laws has to do with why people vote for a particular presidential candidate. And it turns out it's one of three things. They're voting for peace, for prosperity or for personality if there's no issue with peace or prosperity in almost every election in the history of the country. And you look at the situation, up until the Paris attacks, people were voting on their pocketbook. They're worried about jobs. Their son or their daughter has large college loans, can't pay them off and can't get a job. Or they got laid off when they're 45 years old. They don't know what to do. It's hard to get another job or another career. And that was the issue. But after Paris, things changed in the next 3 days. I couldn't believe how fast the polls shifted. And what they decided was the main issue right now in the 2016 election is who is going to be the best commander-in-chief. In other words, they're worried about peace. They're worried about us losing our peace. And then, if that weren't bad enough, a week later, we got the San Bernardino massacre, which is obviously, anybody who's thinking knows that's a terrorist attack. Those people are armed to the hilt. They had an IED factory at their home. This is absolutely a jihadist attack. And they're saying, hey, we've got to elect somebody who's strong, tough, who's going to, fight these people. We can't just sit around and have people massacred anytime we turn around anywhere in the United States. So the issue has changed.
It's interesting, Dr. Lameiro, when you talk about personalities, you talk about issues, and I look back at the last several elections, and especially with President Obama, you look at 2008 and 2012, you'd have to say they were personality-driven. Presidential elections seem to be that, where we focus on the personality, the likability, somewhat what they're going to do, but more the personality and likability of the president. And then we get to the midterm elections, where the Republicans have made gains in both of those, and we say, then we focused on the issues. My question for you is, do you have a sense that while this particular election so far has been, I still think, a personality election, you're hearing an awful lot more about the issues because the issues are raising their heads a lot more often, particularly with terrorism?
Well, I actually think 2012 could have been decided on issues instead of personality, but the Republicans nominated someone that the base did not like. And because that happened, they weren't as enthusiastic. And they didn't see him as the kind of president they really wanted. It's sort of like, do you want a progressive or a progressive light? And they said, we don't care about progressive, period. And so there was no enthusiasm for Mitt Romney the way we're seeing the enthusiasm now. You look at those crowds, those lines to get in to see Donald Trump. It's pretty incredible. So I think we've got a whole different dynamic going on here, but I think there's an overall trend. If you look at 2010, 2014, we had a historic election. 63 House seats went to the Republicans in 2010. Then we had the historic change in a conservative body. The Senate is conservative in the sense it doesn't change that much. It wasn't necessarily politically conservative. And then 2016, the people are telling us now they want a strong conservative commander-in-chief. That's what they're telling us this week in the polls. And right now, Trump is winning that thought. In other words, he's the one they're looking for, somebody who talks tough, talks to the media tough, talks to ISIS tough. And the second one, right after that, who's also quite tough, is Ted Cruz,
right,
the senator from Texas. And what's really interesting, if you look at the numbers down the line, Bush, who's been pretty much in fifth place, has dropped now to a tie at 3% with Carly Fiorina for sixth place. He is really moving in the wrong direction.
So when you talk about your 10 rules for getting elected president, share some of those with people, because I think they're really kind of interesting to see, what kind of filter you're putting people through to get there. Because, people are all considering the candidates out there right now, maybe not as seriously now, obviously, as they will later on, but still, I haven't seen this much interest in it. Again, when you look at the debates and the record numbers of people who are flocking to the debates, people obviously are interested in who is running for president right now. So what are some of the 10 rules there that you apply?
Yeah. Well, there's actually a number, and they're all quite good. And by the way, some of the presidential candidates actually use my 10 laws, I call them, but rules is a good word too. Well, one of them is an optimistic vision. The law of the optimistic vision. Usually, the election will turn on who has the most optimistic vision for the future of America. And hope and change helped Obama quite a bit because that was an optimistic vision that there was going to be something to hope for and something that change presumably was going to be good.
Well, you know who else had an optimistic vision was, and I think back now, was Ronald Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when Ronald Reagan said, "It's morning in America again." And you say, "Wow!" And I remember vividly, and I've said this several times, because it really sticks just visually in my memory, of a grandfather standing there with his grandson looking up at the American flag during the morning, and there's mist in the background, and then it's morning in America again. I mean, that visual itself, and then plus Ronald Reagan's ability to, talk about that in ways that made you say, you know what, this guy makes me feel pretty good, and I think I've got confidence that he'll make things better, and ultimately he helped to do that. Those are, I think your law there is dead on target. I think that's a great one.
Yeah. Another one that might interest you and interest listeners, although it's one that most people don't think of, is what I call the law of electoral elasticity. And that is, regardless of where you are a week before the election can spin around in the last week. And you can actually move 10% of the electorate if there's a big enough issue that comes up and the winner, the ultimate winner, has the right position on it. For example, if there were a terrorist attack the week before the election, you know what the issue is going to be.
Right.
And 10% will move. People will change their minds at the last minute, and that's why you always have to be campaigning right up till the end and know where you stand on the issues. And that's another thing. War and peace is another rule, and people want a peaceful life. They want their home peaceful, their neighborhood peaceful, their shopping center peaceful. They want to live in peace, and they don't want to even be fighting with any other country if they can avoid it. And so basically, if the nation's at war, you tend to re-elect an incumbent because you have a war president already, or if you're at peace and war is threatened, that's kind of our situation now, then whoever's going to deal with that threat is going to get the most votes. And right now, Trump is saying, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to fight. We're going to fight. We're going to beat him. We're going to, bomb him into the Stone Age or whatever he said. I don't know exactly. I'm not quoting him exactly, but he puts out a tough message and people resonate and they say, we need a tough president now. We're at a state in our history where we've got to be tough. These people are attacking us. They're killing us, and they have lots of plans to kill us more, and we're worried about it.
It is really interesting to me when I watch Donald Trump. And again, I don't know where he's going to end up here, but, you're getting closer and closer to the first primary, and he's leading there in both the early primaries, the caucuses and the New Hampshire primary. It's like he looks at the envelope and he says, okay, let me see if I can push it a little further today. Let me see if I can be more outlandish today. It's like he understands precisely how far off the reservation he is, and he's trying to even go further off the reservation right now of what has become political correctness and the way we do things politically in this country. It's like he's trying to destroy that whole thing right now. And you see the mainstream media, and you see traditional candidates, both Republican and Democrat, who are just up in horror right now over what he's doing to this, because they're saying he's ruining everything, when in reality, some people are saying, thank God this guy's throwing some chaos into the mix right here. It's like throwing a bomb into an oatmeal room and trying to blow it up a little bit.
Well, he's definitely doing that, and of course, the downside to that is he may go a little too far. He may go too far, and people will stop perceiving him as a presidential candidate. In other words, he's not presidential material if you go too far. I mean, they don't want a clown. They don't want somebody who's not serious. They don't want somebody who doesn't sound presidential. And if that happens, then you've got Ted Cruz standing in the wings, who's also tough, who's consistent, who's out of the establishment range, and that's why he keeps moving up and moving into second place. And his strategy, by the way, is basically to sit there and be presidential and be number two, and he thinks that Trump is ultimately going to fail, and he's going to be there to pick it up. And, of course, Rubio has a similar strategy, except Rubio is not as tough on amnesty, which turns off a whole lot of Republican primary voters. And that's Rubio's problem. That's why Rubio isn't in number 2 or number 1, because Rubio has a fantastic personality, a fantastic TV presence. He's very smart. He's very knowledgeable. He's a good person. And by the way, he'd make a great president, too. Any of these people would do a much better job than the person who's currently there, who's ignoring the whole issue of terrorism and won't even allow his administration to use the word terrorism or jihad. They're not supposed to use those words.
There's a great piece out this morning by Robert Gates in the Washington Post about what we need in our next president. And I'm asking you about that, obviously, with your 10 laws. We want to come back and continue to talk about what we need with our next president and what is too far for Donald Trump. We'll ask that question of Dr. Gerard Lameiro, who joins us here on the Gary Sutton Show. It's News Radio 910 WSBA, back right after this. I was reading an article this morning as we talk more with Dr. Gerard Lameiro, Ph.D., who is an author, a philosopher, economist, and engineer. Dr. Lameiro, Bob Gates put out an article this morning who's worked in several administrations, and he said, we need a president who understands the system of government bequeathed to us by the founders and grasps the reality that with power divided among 3 branches of government, building coalitions and making compromises are the only ways anything lasting can be done. Primal screaming, obviously he's looking at Trump when he says this, may be good therapy, but it's a poor substitute for practical politics. Arch conservatives may want little government and arch liberals may want a lot, but many functions of government are critical to our well-being, and they can be carried out effectively only if Congress and the president work together. Those who believe that compromise is synonymous with selling out or giving up one's principles need to retake 8th grade American history. The next president needs a core philosophy and set of principles, but he or she also needs to be pragmatic and skilled political leader like Franklin Roosevelt or Ronald Reagan. The problem that we have here is that people have watched the Republicans that they have elected in 2 midterm elections sell out their principles, and so compromise became what President Obama would eventually get. Isn't that true?
Yeah, all of that's true, and that's a fairly good analysis overall, but how you implement those principles he's talking about is really the key. And what does it mean? For example, for many Republicans and the people who are going to be voting in the caucuses and the primaries, their thought on the word compromise means you sell out everything to do what the president wants, and they don't want that anymore. They're sick of it. They want somebody that's going to at least fight and negotiate. And if the president doesn't want to negotiate, then they're sending more and more conservatives back to Washington to get the job done. Because, for example, Obamacare, I remember being on the radio in March of 2010 fighting against Obamacare. And by the way, most every prediction I made about Obamacare has come true.
It's coming true, yeah.
Yeah, and people sent back that historic 63 new House members in 2010 because they were mad about Obamacare then, and they're still upset about it. You still get poll after poll that says the American people don't like Obamacare. Most people, their prices have gone up. They lost their doctor. They lost their plan. You name it, they're negative on it. So they want somebody that's going to fight for their side of the equation and not just cave in. What they like about Trump, and I'm not saying he isn't outrageous, because some of his statements I think are over the top.
They're off the charts, yeah.
Right, but what they like is this is a guy who knows how to negotiate. This is a guy who may talk this way, but he's probably actually going to negotiate a good deal for us, and that's what I think he's ahead. Now, at some point, you asked before we went on break there, you asked, how far is too far? And the answer is none of us know. We don't know, yeah. but he keeps pushing it. He'd be wise to sort of settle down a little bit and act presidential and not go over the top, because he could go over the top, and if he does, he's got Cruz waiting, he's got Rubio waiting.
Let me give you a thought on that, because I always respect your opinion. You have such great insights. Is that, you know, when Trump gets kind of quiet, okay, you see his numbers start to drop. And you see people saying, well, he's becoming just like everybody else. He's becoming kind of status quo. I think that's the perception. I'm not sure to say that that's the truth, but that's the perception. And so you look at him and you say, look, see, he's just like everybody else. he wants to make sure that everybody knows, it seems to me, that he's not anywhere close to being like anybody else. And obviously, I think you're absolutely right. I think Cruz and maybe to some extent Rubio are waiting in the wings right now to step in should he falter. But the point being, this guy seems to be saying it like it is for a lot of people in this country who are so disgusted and find the politics so deplorable the way it's being practiced right now that they're willing to forgive him for just about anything because of what he has personally done so far, not necessarily what he's going to do, but the promise of what he's going to do based on what he has done in the past. They can see tangible evidence of that, and they can't see that with anybody else out there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This guy has a track record that's stellar. I mean, anybody can build up his net worth from $1 million where he started up to $10 billion is just incredible. And the fact that he does negotiate and 96% of his deals are successful is tremendous track record. And the fact that he talks the way he does and nobody can push him around and nobody can buy him out. People are worried about a lot of candidates being bought out by lobbyists and other special interest groups. He's basically said, I don't want anybody's money. They've given him donations, I guess on his website. And he said, I didn't even ask for them.
Right.
Or, he's not looking for them, but he'll take them if you donate. You want to send a check to him. And that. So they like that independence. They want to have somebody who's not bought off, basically. And so he's got a lot going for him, but I think he should rein in some of the outrageous statements just so that he sounds presidential if he really wants this, and it seems like he really wants it. And if he doesn't, do that, and he does hit a limit, and he hits a limit a week before Iowa, he could be in big trouble, and those polls numbers will flip fast. They really will. Because even though we know things are pretty solid where it is, so far he's had a ceiling on his numbers.
Right.
Somewhere in the 25 to 35 range is his ceiling, which means two-thirds of the Republican two-thirds of the Republican voters are looking at somebody else.
And the question is, as they drop out, where will those votes go? We see them right now apparently going to Cruz and Rubio for the most part, although Trump is getting some of that. But we will see as we go forward where those extra votes start to go. Dr. Lameiro, it's always a pleasure having you on, sir. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Oh, great to be with you. You have a great show.
Thank you. Take care now.